So, you want to know about Five Nights at Freddy's? You just watched the movie and you want to know more about the franchise. Or maybe you're a 9-year series veteran and you just want a refresher. Well, old fans and new, this is the video for you. I wanted to briefly go over everything there is in this franchise so that you know what you might want to do, or what might interest you. Whether that's games, the books, the community, or even the movie, because honestly, there's a lot. And on the surface, it can feel kind of overwhelming. I mean, if you are generous in what you consider a game and a book in this franchise, you could argue that as of November 4th, 2023, there are 16 official games, 4 troll fake games, 13 official Fanverse games, 23 storybooks, 10 activity books, and a movie. Not to mention additional things like the fan community, the Scott Games teasers, the lore. Before you run away, the goal of this video isn't to tell you every single detail about all of that, but rather to give you a taste about most of it so you have a general idea of what the franchise is and you know where you want to go next. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's take an overview of Five Nights at Freddy's. And no, I don't have an apron or a cat in this video. We are in the middle of a move. That's why this video is so late, and I'm so sorry. I'm literally in a mostly empty room, and that's why I'm on green screen the whole time. I'm in a blank room with just my computer on a table. Anyway, personal stories aside, let's start with... So the story of Five Nights at Freddy's is actually what a lot of the fans are here for. I'd argue that nearly 40 to 50% of the fan base hasn't actually played many of the games, if any at all, but rather enjoys to watch other people play it on things like YouTube or Twitch and then piece together the story at home. And that's because a lot of the story is heavily up to interpretation. Now, before I continue, if there are any brand new fans in this video, I want to make something crystal clear. There is a true and correct story of Five Nights at Freddy's, but no one knows exactly what that is. I see a lot of folks enter the fandom, watch one timeline video, and assume that that video is 100% correct. And I don't fault y'all for doing that. In any sane fandom, that would be a good thing to do. But you should know that due to how sparse, solid, confirmed information in this franchise is, a lot of the lore and story is up to interpretation. So much so that I believe you could make several fully evidence-backed, completely different timeline of events for these games, and all of them could still be valid. All this is to say, nobody knows the true story of Five Nights at Freddy's, but a lot of us spend our time making our best guess, and that's what I do on this channel. And if you like it, you should subscribe. One of the biggest reasons why this is that technically there isn't really one Five Nights at Freddy's. Where am I? I'm finally out of the woods, but I have no idea where this is. It doesn't look like the last floor, or it doesn't look like a floor at all. There's nothing even in here. There's no food, no water. There's... There's that. The official Rytoast U2's plushie. Okay, I gotta drop the bit for like a second. I am so legitimately excited about this guy. Look at this guy. Look at this guy. I love him. He's got a little apron. And he's got the little U2's eyes, but they're down because he's so bashful and happy. He's like huge. He's 9 inches. He's pillow-sized. I love him. Look at this little guy. His little apron drawstrings on the back. He's got a little apron. And it's being made by U2's, like the guys who make those really dope FNAF figures. Like, this is crazy. This plush will be available to buy November 10th. But here's the catch. U2's only does limited runs, so these plushes, although they will be available November 10th, will only be available for 2 weeks. That is November 10th to November 24th. You have 2 weeks to buy one of these, or else they are gone forever. Although... there is one other way to get your hands on one of these guys. U2's is generous enough to be doing a giveaway for this plush. The link is in the description and right here so that you can access this giveaway. Once you get there, you can do 4 tasks for entries in the giveaway. All you have to do is follow U2's on Twitter, visit their YouTube channel page, visit their Reddit page, and visit their Instagram page. But make sure you do it through this website like I'm showing you here. All of this is completely free to do, meaning you can get entries for this giveaway without spending a cent. Thanks again to U2's for making this a reality. I am so excited about this little guy. I'm not going to shut up about him for the next 2 weeks, but I'll see you on the 10th when it drops. I guess I'll be here on the 10th. I guess I'll just take a nap then, I'm tired. I would argue that there's 5 main clusters of the FNAF story, ones that may or may not coincide with each other. Obviously, the games have their own interpretive story, but the books have 3. First, there's the novel trilogy that started the books off, The Silver Eyes, The Twisted Ones, and The Fourth Closet. Then there's the 12 Fazbear Frights short story collection that kind of feels like its own story. Now, there are individual stories throughout it, but that would be a cluster of story. Finally, in a similar fashion, there's the 8 Tales from the Pizzaplex short story collections, which again feel like their own separate thing. And finally, there's the movie. So I hear you, is this just the same plot 5 different times? Not exactly. In fact, the way that these 5 collections of story interact with one another is possibly the biggest debate in the community. Pretty much everyone, if not everyone, agrees that the story and timeline of the games is the central Five Nights at Freddy's story. So usually information from the games trumps information from the books. The problem is that realistically, we don't have a lot of information from the games, especially the earlier games in the series. So for those gaps, non-game FNAF material is used to fill. So are all the books canon to the games? Well, rather than give you my biased opinion, I'll just read what the creator of the franchise, Scott Cawthon, has publicly said on the matter, which, to be fair, isn't very specific or helpful. In regards to the first 3 novels, the Silver Eyes trilogy, he said this on Steam: "The games and books should be considered to be separate continuities, even if they do share many familiar elements." He continues with, "So yes, the book is canon just as the games are. That doesn't mean that they are intended to fit together like 2 puzzle pieces. I would actually ask anyone wanting to read the book, even if you are a devout fan of the games, to read the book for the sake of enjoying the book, and don't try to solve anything. The book is a reimagining of the Five Nights at Freddy's story, and if you go into it with that mindset, I think you'll really enjoy it." So that feels pretty definitive. Keep in mind, this was written in 2015, 8 years ago. But at least at the time of release, Scott stated that the novel trilogy is not in the same continuity. Now, here's something I want to get very clear, and he reiterates this in the post that I just read. There's a difference between canon and in continuity. So all official FNAF media is canon to FNAF. Like it's all official. The question is, what is within the same continuity? So we'll use continuity here on out, but if I ever slip up and say canon, I'm referring to continuity. So as far as the game's continuity go, the Silver Eyes novel trilogy is a reimagining of it. What does that mean for lore? Well, technically, most of the time, this means that it takes place in the same universe, so certain rules and how things work can be the same, and certain character names can even carry over. But as far as actual events, that gets more loose. I'll get more into that, but before we do, here's what he had to say about Fazbear Frights before they were released. "This series will launch with 5 books, each containing 3 different short stories with unique characters and plotlines, some connected directly to the games, and some not." If you haven't noticed yet, Scott really likes to keep things vague when it comes to confirming or deconfirming information. Literally, his words were, "Some are, some aren't." Great. Thanks, Scott. The Tales from the Pizzaplex books actually, as of now, have no direct quote from Scott on whether or not they are in continuity. But on the back of some of the copies, it says, quote, "A collection of new Five Nights at Freddy short stories set in the worlds of the newest games." The continuity relevance of Tales from the Pizzaplex is pretty much the hottest debate right now in the fandom. Some fans take that sentence and other things within the books as confirmation that they are 100% in the same continuity as the games, and some don't. Both are perfectly valid opinions, and there's good evidence on both sides of the argument. This video isn't really about that distinction, so I don't want to take too much time to focus on it. What I will say is the general opinion of the fandom is that the Silver Eyes trilogy is not the exact same story as the games, but a lot of the way that it works and the characters within it do parallel the games. The Fazbear Fright stories don't really have anything to do with the game story, except for possibly the epilogues, where it talks about the Stitch Wraith. But again, certain things we learn within Fazbear Frights, like materials such as Remnant and Agony, tell us more about how things function within the games. And finally, like I said, Tales from the Pizzaplex is probably the hottest debate in the entire fandom. No matter what you say on it, people are going to be heated on either side. Finally, we have the new movie. There haven't been any official statements on whether or not the movie is within the game's continuity, so yeah, take it as you will. I will say a lot of the things in the movie don't line up with facts that we have in the games, so it's probably a Silver-Eyes kind of situation. And I will say the majority of the fandom was assuming it would be a Silver-Eyes type situation going into the movie, but I guess that's for you to decide. So that's enough about the non-game material of this franchise. Time to move on to really the central core aspect of this franchise. So, like I mentioned, there's no provable one true timeline for these games. So realistically, what do I think happens in these games? Well, if I wanted to do a full timeline, it would require a dedicated video. And I do really think that the best timelines in this community are the ones that you make for yourself. But for the sake of completion, let me go over the story in general. Here's the elevator pitch for the story of the games. Petty revenge by the creator Fazbear turns into a quest for immortality. Meanwhile, possessed animatronics lash out at everyone around them, and it's everyone's problem. Now, the logical question when I say that is, who's the creator, and if they're possessed, why? Who's possessing the animatronics and what's their goal? And well, that depends on the set of animatronics we're talking about. So I guess we'll go game by game. And as we go, we'll cover the games themselves because why not? Keep in mind, I'm only going to be going over the main story and lore you get from each game, and some basic information about them, not what you can interpret as a timeline or things you can interpret from the lore of the games. Even then, I'm going to mainly focus on the story of the game itself, not necessarily the lore it tells us about the grander timeline, because that's your job. I want you to play these games, they're really good. And I may even leave out some hidden Easter eggs and some secret characters. That way you can encounter them yourself, and I have an excuse in case I forgot something. Anyway, time for... FNAF 1 takes place in a rundown Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. It's not entirely clear whether the restaurant is actively open while we're playing the game, but it is clear that the animatronics are actively possessed. The gameplay consists of you tracking where animatronics are via the cameras and shutting down the appropriate door so that those animatronics can't get in your office. Everything is connected to power, and the more you use, the more the power drains. Your goal is to survive until 6 AM at increasing difficulties against the main cast of FNAF: Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and very occasionally and rarely the Easter egg character, Golden Freddy. You do this for 5 nights and you unlock a harder 6th night. You beat that and you unlock Custom Night, the 7th night, where you can individually adjust the difficulty of each animatronic. This is seen as like the core gameplay of Five Nights at Freddy's, and most fan games that are made about the series are based off of this game and how it works. Although at this point, with how many games have been released, this style of gameplay is honestly half of the games in the franchise. Now, the lore in this game is incredibly sparse and vague, but that's more a symptom of the fact that this game was Scott's Hail Mary. He'd wanted to make games for a while, but after no success, he eventually made Five Nights at Freddy's. It was sort of a screw you to everybody who said that his character designs looked scary. He said, okay, they're scary, I'll make them scary. Logically, when he made this game, he wasn't planting the seeds for a 9+ year franchise story, but he was smart enough that he left a lot of things up to the interpretation of the player and a lot of little details that are unexplained at the moment, but he can call back to later in the guise of foreshadowing. Many of the details of this game become important much later on in this franchise, but don't be mistaken. Most likely these details are just post hoc justifications of story beats later on, not god-tier foreshadowing from day one. The important lore that is in this game is from the newspaper articles that can rarely appear on the walls and the phone guy's dialogue. The newspapers tell us that 5 children went missing at a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and although there was a suspect, they never got any charges to stick because they couldn't find the bodies of the children. We also learned that eventually foul odors started coming from the animatronics and that the place shut down. Most people interpret this as, okay, the 5 kids went on to haunt these 5 animatronics, which makes a lot of sense. And since it was confirmed to have closed down, either we are guarding this closed down restaurant or it has reopened since and we're guarding it while it's open. Finally, we learned that the previous guard pretty much definitely died on the job, and that we're playing as M.X.E.S. We also get fired for our foul odor and tampering with the animatronics. It's a pretty succinct game with a decent little mystery attached, but that lore ramps up in the very next game of the franchise, FNAF 2. FNAF 2 takes place in a less rundown and seemingly currently open Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. It's definitely a different building from the first game, and it has brand new toy animatronics that are equipped with criminal database scanners in order to keep children safe. The old models are left in a back room and used for parts. The gameplay is similar to the first, but instead of closing doors and balancing your power, you simply use your flashlight to look down the hallway and the open vents in your office, and if anything is in your office, you put a mask on until it leaves. You also have to wind a music box on the cameras to keep the marionette dormant, a new animatronic. Otherwise, it will just hunt you down and kill you even if you have your mask on. The animatronics in this game are the withered variants of the original cast, along with Toy Freddy, Toy Chica, Toy Bonnie, and Toy Foxy, who is currently called the Mangle, as they're always broken apart, along with two more additions, Balloon Boy and the Marionette. We don't get as much written lore in this game, rather lore from 3 different sources: our resident phone guy, the newspaper clipping at the end, and, starting in this game, a continuing series staple, mini-games you can rarely play at certain instances that give you lore. The phone guy and the newspaper sort of give us clues as to what's happening around this game specifically. We learn that this place opened up very recently, but within a few short weeks, because of an investigation, it shuts down. After it's shut down, the toy animatronics are scrapped for malfunctioning, and the original models are held onto in case they can be refurbished down the line if they ever want to reopen. This is our first of many hints that this game is actually a prequel of the first game, and that this Freddy's was opened before the Freddy's we see in FNAF 1. The lore minigames give us a lot more information about the possession and ghosts of this franchise. We learn that the marionette, often referred to as the puppet, is actually the reason that the other animatronics become possessed in the first place. We also learn that this purple man in Foxy Go Go Go, often referred to as Purple Guy, because we don't get an official name for this dude until like 4 games from now. 4 games and 3 books from now. But we learn that he killed these 5 children, and that their souls were led into the animatronics in order to, quote, give them life again. But that's not all we get. In Give Cake to the Children, we again see this purple man roll up to outside of a Fazbear restaurant and kill another kid, which seems important. Finally, we have Save Them, where the puppet is leading Freddy towards the purple guy. If you go around, you can see up to 5 corpses scattered about the FNAF 2 location. If you follow the puppet, eventually you do see Purple Guy, in which he rushes you and the game ends, with the text "You can't" being displayed. This is all wild and a lot of information, but it also adds a bit of contention to the fandom. If you notice, there are 2 sets of 5 bodies. One of them is at Pirates Cove with an OG Foxy, and the other one is scattered around the FNAF 2 location. We know that realistically these cannot be the same kids. The Missing Child Incident, or MCI kids from the first game, were stuffed into the animatronic suits and never found. The kids in Save Them, however, are scattered around the pizzeria. This introduces the Dead Child Incident, or the DCI, as these kids are not missing, they're all over the place. It's hotly debated where, if anywhere, these souls go. But regardless, this does bring Purple Guy's death total up to 11 kids. One more fact that becomes important later on is that the phone guy tells us during this investigation, they try to get a hold of the original owner of Fazbear Entertainment. They can't get a hold of them, but apparently there was an older restaurant called Fazbear's Family Diner. Furthermore, we learned that when somebody put on a yellow suit in a back room, all of the animatronics started acting up. The final bit of lore we get is that the character we play as throughout the main 6 nights of the game is Jeremy Fitzgerald. However, for some reason, on Custom Night, we play as Fritz Smith, and we once again get fired for foul odor and tampering with the animatronics. Well, that marks that one. On to FNAF 3. This game takes a bit of a shift in location, instead taking place in a haunted attraction based on the tragedies of the Fazbear brand. We play as someone working security, as well as being a sort of living attraction as the security guard. The gameplay takes a bit of a shift as well. You're only defending against one real animatronic, Springtrap. What we later learn is Purple Guy's final resting place. You have to find him on the cameras and lure him away using audio cues. The difficulty comes in the fact that the systems here fail frequently and you have to reboot them, along with the fact that there's several phantom animatronics, which are burned ghosts of previous animatronics we see in the games, that don't kill you, but they'll jump scare you and shut off your ventilation, so you have to reboot that too. Essentially, defend against one guy and try not to get distracted. The lore in this game is once again through dialogue and minigames. The phone logs we start hearing by night 3 are actual recordings from earlier Fazbear restaurants, in which we learn more about the Springlock suit, the thing Springtrap is and how they're supposed to be used. The Springlock animatronics are full exo and endoskeleton animatronics, but they can be worn because the endoskeleton can be held up against the sides of the wall of the inside of the animatronic via loaded springs. Essentially, there's the inner robot and the outer robot, like this, and the inner robot gets held to the side so a person can go in there. But I mean, if you've seen the movie or if you think for 3 seconds, you can figure out why this is a bad thing, because water or sudden movements can cause the springlocks to fail. And if you're in here, you die. Like, you die horribly. We also learned that after several simultaneous Springlock failures, they were put away and never really used again. In this game, there are 2 sets of minigames. One of them is focused on our antagonist that we're facing, and the other one is focused on the children's souls moving on. In between every night, you play a minigame where you play as a different FNAF 1 animatronic being led by this Shadow Freddy. You wander to the back room, can't go in, and then the purple guy jumps out, attacks, and dismantles you. Finally, in the last one, we play as a spirit who corners that purple guy in the back room. He puts on a yellow rabbit suit, trying to scare us off. But due to the moisture and age, it fails, killing him inside. Adding to the phone call we hear earlier on, we can confirm that this is what later becomes Springtrap. However, there's one more set of secret minigames you can access. By doing various Easter eggs throughout the game, you can access these weird FNAF 2 themed minigames, but if you do secrets within those minigames, you can give cake to crying children. And if you do all of them and access the last minigame, Happiest Day, you can give cake one more time and seemingly help all these children move on. Whether or not you do these minigames determines whether you get the bad ending or the ending of the game. Either way, the location burns down, but Springtrap survives. Now, on to FNAF 4. This game was a pretty big departure from the previous one, not having any cameras to use. Instead, you have to go to the open doors on your left and right and listen for breathing to determine if you should shine your flashlight or close the door. The lore in this one also took a big departure, instead showing us through the minigames you get to play in between the nights of the gameplay, the life of a young child who's terrified of animatronics, and gets relentlessly picked on by his older brother, and would confide in his Fazbear plushie. One day when the bullying went too far, he died in a tragic accident. In this coma-like state, we see the voice of Fazbear promise to put him back together again. There's a lot of debate surrounding this game, stemming from who exactly we're playing as, to if it's actually all nightmares, or if it's even experiments done by the purple guy. There's evidence on either side for a lot of these debates, so I'll leave that up to you, and for now, we'll just move on to the next game, the 5th installment of Five Nights at Freddy's, Sister Location. Weirdly enough, even though that this is technically the 5th FNAF game, no one ever refers to it as FNAF 5, always Sister Location. Weirder still, even though the next game is Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator, a game where FNAF isn't in the title, most people refer to it as FNAF 6 or just Pizzeria Simulator. Anyway, this game is the biggest departure from the earlier games, being more story focused and having the player, Michael, do different minigame-esque tasks night by night. There's a lot of lore in this one, and mainly because it's the really first story-based FNAF game in the entire series. But for the sake of the video, I will boil it down to this. Someone named Mr. Afton created the Funtime animatronics, Funtime Freddy, Funtime Foxy, Ballora, and Circus Baby. But for some reason, they all had weird aspects to them. Specifically, Circus Baby and Funtime Freddy were able to scoop children into their stomach hatch. They were made for Circus Baby's Pizza World. But before the restaurant ever got to open, the creator's daughter, Elizabeth Afton, snuck away and got alone with Circus Baby, which triggered Circus Baby's secret things, and it scooped Elizabeth up, killing her inside. Judging by the way Circus Baby talks in-game and the change of her eye colors, it's implied that this girl possesses Circus Baby, and that all 4 of them are left in the bunker of Circus Baby's party and rental. We learn via the cutscene at the very end of Custom Night that Mr. Afton's son, Michael, is sent down there to, quote, put her back together and do what he's told. When Michael does this, he finds that the Funtimes have actually fused together into one endoskeleton mass known as M.X.E.S. M.X.E.S uses a machine called the Scooper to make Michael's insides outsides. They then wear him like a mascot suit in order to escape the bunker, but of course, eventually, he begins to rot and they have to flee into the sewers. Then, for reasons that are explained in later games, Michael stands up again. almost possessing himself, and swears to find his father. There is a lot more lore in this game. Like, there's so much lore in this game. But that is the basic premise, and you should play it yourself to figure out the rest of it, as you should with all of these games. There is also a custom night that was added later if you beat the secret night of the game. This custom night returns to the very traditional FNAF 1 style of gameplay. Now, onto that Pizzeria simulator I mentioned earlier. Just to mention, the opening of this game is absolutely peak, and you really should experience it before you know anything about this game. So skip here to get to the next game, Ultimate Custom Night, if you haven't played FNAF 6 yet. But if you have, or you don't care to listen to me, let's move on to FNAF 6, in which we see the player running their own pizzeria. There's essentially 3 different modes of this game. There's the daytime section, where it's more of a tycoon pizzeria simulator-esque thing, where you're literally making your own pizza place. Then at night is the more traditional FNAF style of gameplay, but instead of waiting until 6 AM, you just have to accomplish the tasks that are set out for you. Meanwhile, trying not to make enough noise so that you don't draw the animatronics near, and try to keep an eye on them on the grid map system. I don't fully understand how this game works, I'm gonna be honest. I'm very bad at this game. Then the third section is after each night you have an opportunity to salvage incoming animatronics. This is the really spooky part of the game, and you have to keep track of movements as you play noises. This game is, once again, packed with lore. Maybe the most out of the entire franchise. It touches on all parts of the timeline, where it is and before. But for the sake of the video, I'm just gonna try to touch on the story of this game. A game that centers around the man who built the animatronics, but not Mr. Afton. This man labels his tapes HRY223, and because of the books, we can guess that this man's name is Henry. Henry made the animatronics, and Henry wants to end it all because of the guilt he feels after watching everything unfold over all these years. But he decides he has to end what's going on before he can do that. So he makes a fake pizzeria, a pizzeria simulator, designed to lure the remaining players of this game. And it works. He's able to attract the remains of Ennard, 2 animatronics that split off, Scrap Baby and Molten Freddy, as well as the remains of Mr. Afton. The fans call him Scrap Trap. The credits credit him as William Afton. And finally, using the lefty animatronic, he's able to capture the marionette. Once Henry does this, he laments onto everything that's happened. He mentions that Afton's daughter's name is Elizabeth. He mentions that the kid who was killed outside of a Freddy's in that FNAF 2 minigame is his own daughter, Charlotte, and she's the one that goes on to possess the puppet. He also mentions that he has a feeling that the player, Michael, wants to be here and won't take the optional exit. Then, everything is burnt to the ground by Henry, himself, presumably Michael, and all the animatronics inside, supposedly ending things forever. But of course, this game came out several years ago. It didn't end there. The next game, Ultimate Custom Night, or UCN, was sort of a send-off for the original era of these FNAF games. It's more of a final hurrah for the Scott Games-led version of FNAF. But there's lore here too. Through the voice lines and death quotes and cutscenes in between, we can get a good guess that this game is a sort of eternal torment for William Afton, done by the spirit within Golden Freddy. And this spirit is forcing William to go through this over and over again as sort of a punishment for what he's done. And again, like the rest of them, there's more lore here, but that's good enough for this video. Then there's a bit of a pause, as this marks the transition from Scott being the main developer of these games to handing it off to a full-fledged indie studio, Steel Wool. Scott is still heavily involved in the production of these games and is still technically the only person who fully knows the story. But as far as developing games go, that's now in Steel Wool's hands. And with this transition, we get the first VR game of the franchise, Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted. The gameplay of this game is sort of a compilation of all the games that came before it, except for FNAF 6 and Ultimate Custom Night. But there's still references to those games, and it adds more original modes like Parts and Service. The game also features several collectibles, namely coins and lore cassette tapes. The lore cassette tapes specifically also involve the antagonist of this game. The more of them you collect, the more materialized this weird glitching rabbit is. For the life of me, I can't find if it's actually ever officially referenced like this, but the fans call this thing Glitch Trap. There was another name that was mentioned in the fandom, Malhare, which I wish we went with because I think that's a better name, but generally it's called Glitch Trap. The lore of this game is that it's an actual in-universe game. We are a beta tester of a company testing out this game after it's been handed off from the previous development company. The previous beta tester was noticing some strange things happening, including this weird glitchy rabbit, so she started leaving behind cassette tapes to kind of warn us and tell us what she knows about it. We learned that this VR game is in fact not the only in-universe Freddy's game. In fact, in-universe, in the continuity of the game's timeline, there's an entire series of indie games developed by what Fazbear calls a crazy individual, meant to disparage the brand and talks about all these horrible things that goes on. The Fazbear brand in-universe is denying all these things and makes the VR game to kind of make light of these accusations and be like, yeah, haha, funny story. Anyway, let's move on to what actually happened. Nothing. But it turns out that Fazbear paid the indie developer to make those games to cover up things that actually happened. This VR game being the capstone to it. Now, I know that sounds really confusing, it's because it is. A lot of people aren't sure what exactly to interpret that with the lore. There's a debate on where to take it. I personally see this as Steelwool saying, hey, those games before Help Wanted, they still probably happened, but if we get anything wrong, trust the newer stuff first. Some people say that this is a hard reboot of the whole series, and some people say it doesn't mean anything, because the game says that Fazbear made these games to cover up the real events, therefore, those older games are still real events. Regardless, it's a big debate in the community how to take that information. But not only did all this happen, when they were creating the VR game, they scanned in a bunch of old tech for authenticity, and when they scanned in one of the motherboards, this glitch trap appeared. Throughout the game, Glitch Trap is trying to take over the player's mind, and the DLC Curse of Dreadbear tells us that it worked. And now Glitch Trap has a servant in the real world. Finally, we move on to the most recent game in the series, Security Breach. Sometime later, the Freddy Fazbear Mega Pizzaplex is created. In this game, we play as a boy named Gregory trying to survive the night after being locked into the Mega Mall. It's the first open world game in the series in which we're exploring and trying to escape this Pizzaplex. Even more different, Freddy is actually an ally in this game, being a rideable robot that we can get inside of for mobility and to hide. The story of this game is showing us the aftermath of Help Wanted. The Glitch Trap servant Vanny is hunting down Gregory throughout this Pizzaplex, and she's using the other animatronics to help her do it. There's not a whole lot of lore about the earlier games in this game, but there is a lot of lore of this game specifically. Not to mention there's 6 different endings that you can get. Now, it hasn't yet been confirmed which of these endings is the in-continuity one, but most fans generally agree that all of these endings are technically possible within the continuity. The question is which one actually happened. Like, all the other ones are like what-if scenarios. Regardless, the big lore reveal is in the Burn Trap ending, where if you go back after 6 AM, defeat the rest of the animatronics, and go under Roxy Raceway, you find that the FNAF 6 location has sunken underneath the Pizzaplex being built right on top of it. And inside that FNAF 6 location is a rabbit animatronic with a corpse fused to it, charging in a station. Now, this is a huge debate right now because this is fresh lore and we don't have a lot of context for it. Some people argue this is William Afton after the fires of FNAF 6. Other people argue that this is a different robot being used as a vessel for Glitch Trap to eventually be put in. Although I will say most people generally agree that the end goal of this robot, whatever it is to have Glitch Trap be put inside of it. The free DLC for Security Breach, Ruin, expands this story even further. We see the Pizzaplex after some sort of collapse, and a girl named Cassie goes in to rescue Gregory. But when she gets down to that FNAF 6 location, she finds that Gregory isn't there at all. But instead, a robot referred to as the Mimic pretended to be Gregory to lure her down there and have her turn off all the security so it could get out. And of course, there's 3 more endings for that DLC too, so that's where we're at right now in the lore. But you didn't think that was all the games, did you? You wish it was. There's several more games actually. Talking about the side games. starting with one of the most important side games, so important that some people argue it's a main series game, myself included, that being FNAF World. This is a top-down RPG that's more akin to like Pokemon meets Final Fantasy, but very simplified and worse. I like it. I'm gonna dunk on this game. I do like this game a lot. I think it's very fun. There is a lot of lore in here, but it's very vague and speculative. Scott himself has even said that he regrets linking FNAF World to the lore, which does imply it is linked to the lore. It seems to be related to FNAF 3 or FNAF 4, as it kind of mirrors the speeches that is given to the kid at the end of FNAF 4, as well as the secrets that you have to do in FNAF 3. But again, it's very unclear what the lore of this game is. Then there's FNAF Special Delivery, an AR game that was released on mobile more akin to Pokemon Go, where you play on a map and defend yourself from roaming animatronics. It's actually kind of fun, but there's two main issues with the game. One, it hasn't had any official updates in like over a year at this point, so it's kind of dead. But two, and this is my personal gripe, as fun as this game is, you can't really play it in public because you have to spin around using your camera like a crazy person, which kind of defeats the purpose of a map-based game. Regardless, the lore of this game is sort of filling in the gap between Help Wanted and Security Breach, where we see emails from various companies talking about what's going on, and we learn more about Vanny. Then there's a category I like to call filler/teaser games. Essentially, Freddy in Space 2, Freddy in Space 3, and Security Breach Fury's Rage. They all serve similar functions. They're spin-off, smaller games meant to either fill a void between full content or tease like one or two bits of lore. Freddy in Space 2 and 3 are Mega Man-esque side-scrolling shooters, whereas Fury's Rage is more of the classic arcade side-scrolling beat-em-up game. They're fun time wasters and they have little hints of lore, but most fans realize they're not really full games and don't consider them as such. And finally, in like a month from now, we will be getting Help Wanted 2, the second VR game of the series. And with that, you're all caught up. Now there are fan works in the Fanverse games, and there's songs and there's a lot of community stuff I didn't go over, but that's mainly because it's such a huge amount of stuff that I would just be listing my favorite things, and like that's not really the point of this video. But for the sake of clarity, I should specify the difference between a fan game and a Fanverse game. So there are hundreds, if not thousands, of fan games from FNAF, where people make FNAF-styled games with their own characters. There's so many of these, and some of them are such high quality, that Scott actually did something called the Fanverse Initiative, where he financially backed and made official a few different FNAF fan games that already existed. And with those funds, the creators are working on more enhanced versions. There's a lot of them, so you can go look into that as well. But that's the quick recap of everything in the FNAF series. If you want a more in-depth video that will go over everything, I highly recommend something BarBADroid has been cooking up. Now, it's not out yet, but he's been talking about making an ultimate FNAF guide that's going to be like 8+ hours long. So look forward to that. I think it's going to be really good, and I'm really excited for it. In the meantime, if you came from the movie, you should check out this video where I talk about every single FNAF movie Easter egg. A huge shout out to the best channel members around, the Dough Risers, and until next time, as always, stay toasty, slices.